I'm your host, Zen Garcia.
On this Book of Enoch study. Zen Garcia, are you there, sir?
I am, brother. How are you doing this week?
I'm doing good, man. Been a crazy busy week. I want to give a big shout out and a thank you to all of our supporters. My son has had back problems for about 5 years now. Been in a lot of pain, and finally we're like, we got to do something about this. So we've been searching for a long time for a solution, and nothing's worked so far. But we stumbled across what looks like a very promising stem cell therapy that does not use fetal tissue. They use bone marrow and stuff like that. That looks very promising, but it was going to cost over $13,000, which we didn't have. So I put out a notice on Facebook and built a donation page on my website for him. And it looks like we may have raised all of the money that we need for it. I went ahead and booked it in faith on Friday. For this Friday, I booked it on Monday. Figuring, well, okay, Father, you're just going to have to make a way. I'm going to trust you for it. We've had quite a number of people contribute. I want to say a huge thank you on behalf of our whole family, certainly for Jeremiah in that regard. And somebody donated some Bitcoin. And I don't know if you've been following that, but man, it's been going up quite a bit in the last few days. So I'm still waiting for that to clear the bank. But if it does, then we should be funded and ready to go for Friday. So very
That's
excited
awesome.
about that. Yeah.
Praise God.
Yeah. Praise God. And thank you to all that contributed for sure. And, I'm a little bit more hopeful about the garden too, man.
Wonderful. That's great.
Yeah, it's been a pretty good week, man. I've been working hard and starting to see some plants that are actually surviving.
Yay.
It's like we'd see them grow so well in the seedling stage, and then I'd put them outside and be like dead, in a day. But I've been working, it's trying to find that right balance of location, the amount of sun and water and fertilizer and, all that. So definitely a learning curve, but got some stuff figured out in that regard. And I've been kind of a little bit of a MacGyver engineer out there today. Rigged up. Sheila bought this soaker hose that just sort of drips all day long, And I've had this barrel, like a 50-gallon barrel, that I rigged up for it, and gravity works. That I have this. I put it up high, and my thinking was, okay, well, as long as the barrel is higher than the garden beds. Then in theory, I should be able to just run this super soaker hose thing from the barrel into the beds, and it will just sort of self-water like all day. So just got that rigged up about an hour ago, and I'm excited to see if it works tomorrow. So far, so good. It looks like it is working. So if that's the case, I should have the watering thing figured out, and hopefully we'll actually grow some food.
Sweet. Yeah, I trust you will. You'll be successful in some things and, learn from other things. But I find that with regard to the seedlings and the new sprouts, that you have to really kind of keep them out of the sun until they get a little bit larger of size, and then they can actually bear it, because the sun will burn them up pretty quick.
Yeah, you go to some place that sells like already they're past the seedling stage, and everywhere I saw like cilantro, it says full sun. I'm like, okay, put out full sun, and in like hours it's dead. I'm like, no! And people are laughing in the chat room. This is from a guy who's got a TV series called Seed, right? Yeah, right. I wear my Seed shirt, to remind myself, hey, look, you've been working on Seed, which I am also. Things are moving a little bit slower because of the lockdown and everything, but things are still good. I've got it up from the guys in South Africa. Things are moving forward. We're pretty close to a picture lock in terms of rough draft animation and camera moves. So once we have a picture lock, then we go in and do all the fine tuning, texturing, and all that stuff. So I'm still working on that. But I go to like Home Depot with a Seed shirt, and they're like, "Oh, what? You're real serious about this, huh?" I'm like, "Well, that's a TV series. I I'm wearing a green seed shirt like right now, but I do not have a green thumb. So,
not yet, anyway.
Working on it. Working on
it. Right.
Yeah. So yeah, what have you been up to this past week?
I'm working on a book called The Pre-adamites and the Antediluvian World. And I had written several chapters on this topic in many different books. And so I decided to compile all that information and then streamline it and organize it by outline. And so I'm putting it together, and I think I can have this one done pretty quickly, but it's a topic that a lot of people are interested in. And then when we do the AMAs, Ask Me Anything shows, there's a number of questions that are always pertinent to that particular issue. And so my daughter-in-law suggested that I do it, and I thought I could do it pretty quickly and pretty easily. And so that's what I've been focused on. But just we always do a weekly update with the Sacred Word Publishing, and she mentioned to me that there's been a number of people asking myself, as I'm sure they're asking you, to do something in response to the controversy of Paul and all of that. And so I did take a few excerpts out of one of the books that I published, the Epistles of the Apostles and the Church Fathers. And I addressed that issue earlier this evening and did a 2-hour show on that. And so, and that's just, there's so many sources that I have that I can pull from, but I am starting to address it. And I did actually listen to like 90 minutes of that 2-hour program that the Christian Truthers did on the topic. So I've kind of backed off just a little bit. I'm kind of waiting in the wings over here to see what else comes out, because I was pretty hot and heavy on that for probably the last 2 weeks. Although I had a really good heart-to-heart conversation with Justin, and brought in Adam from Parable of the Vineyard. And the three of us had just a real nice face-to-face, through like a Zoom meeting deal. And, like anything else, I'm like, look, he still names Yeshua as his Messiah. So I'm like, you're my brother, man. Just, as long as you're doing that. Right.
We're brothers, and, and I consider us friends too.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I will oppose what you're talking about. So I'm just, but we had a good conversation. And in the course of the conversation, sort of the comment came up, do you think maybe the Bible has been messed with? Now, this is like yet another can of worms, right? I mean, because we want to talk about the inerrancy of Scripture. And I believe that the Scripture is divinely inspired and inerrant.
Yes, I do.
But I would say, parenthetically, in the original language it was written in.
Right.
Since it's gone through numerous translations through various languages, that I'm not so sure about. And, the more I actually take the time, and, this, when people say, well, God is faithful to preserve his word, I say two things. First of all, Yeshua is the word that was made flesh, and he certainly preserved him. But as it pertains to the written word, I believe he did preserve it. And we have the benefit of countless manuscripts, many very ancient ones. And, we got things like the Dead Sea Scrolls that, take us even further back, that he has preserved the word for us so that we can go back. And, I'm always, people are like, well, what's the best translation? I'm like, frankly, I don't think any of them are. I wouldn't give any of them that title. I grew up on King James. That's my preferred study Bible, because that's where I have all my memory verses and whatnot. But it's not perfect, contrary to the King James only camp that would say otherwise. And so, my thing is like, look, I think we should have, you should always use multiple translations, English translations, if that's what you speak, and compare. When you see a noticeable, most of the verses, there's not a big difference, but there are some where there's a notable difference, and you're like, well, why is that? Well, then you get to go look, and we have such amazing resources available to us at our fingertips,
right,
online, where we, I always say, look, have multiple English translations, that you can compare while having a good Hebrew, Aramaic, Greek concordance, lexicon, resources nearby that you can look at. And certainly websites like BibleHub.com or Blue Letter Bible or Bible Gateway. These are the three big ones that those are my go-to sites that I like to get. But when you start looking into church history, and you start seeing characters like Marcion, personally, and these guys show up early. I mean, we're talking within 100 years or so of the apostles. Right. Some of these guys show up, and they have radically different views. There was actually Justin did a video called the Nazarim, and I'm like, dude, you should go back and just watch your own video because he did such a great job of showing where things got jacked up and how Paul was identified as the ringleader of the sect called the Nazarim, the Way. And so how can he be a false prophet if he's the leader of the Nazarim, who you identified as the true, followers of Christ until, later, early so-called church fathers and other characters like Marcion and whatnot started getting in there and messing things up. And what do you know? The Romans are killing the true followers of Christ, the Way. Right. And then all of a sudden, hey, we're Christian now. And Christianity moves from a Hebrew-based idea to a Rome-based idea, right. And things start getting jacked up. And so I forget the guy's name. I posted it a lot of times. I celebrate the weekly Shabbat still on Saturday, and I like to listen to the Torah studies. Sometimes even listen to the ones that I did years ago, and watch other things online that I can find. And I forget this guy's name, but he was a textual critic kind of guy. And he was showing how, various manuscripts have been significantly doctored. And, we've talked about it before, and I've talked about it in other shows. The Yohanan Kama is what it's known as. For there are three that bear witness, the Father, Son, Holy Spirit, these three are one. That's not in the original text. That was a marginal note that got inserted much later, just like Lucifer, found its way from the margin into Isaiah 14. And this guy was talking about how that was a fairly common thing. So, where you see a parenthetical, forget what chapters, I think it's in Mark, where it says parenthetically, and saying this, Jesus was speaking, and saying this, he made all meats clean. No, he didn't. That's a scribal, insert. And so the question comes up like, okay, well, how much of that has taken place? Right. And how can we figure that out? Because, and this is what I was kind of challenging, Adams still believes Paul's legit, but he's entertaining, the various arguments. He's looking at both sides. So he's very neutral. I'm very pro Paul. He's neutral, and Justin's now against Paul. So we had a good, heart-to-heart brotherly conversation. But I said, why don't you go back, Justin, to your original video that you did on the Nazarim and start looking to see where perhaps the text has been altered. Because Marcion basically had an idea that the God of the Old Testament was not the father of Yeshua. That Yeshua came to set us free from that guy. I
haven't heard that. That's interesting.
Yeah, so it's a whole other can of worms, but I don't know how deep I'm going to get into it, so I just kind of put it out there for other people. Hey, check this out.
Did Marcion believe that Yahweh was Satan, as a lot of people?
No, I don't know. I couldn't say definitively either way. Yeah. If that was the case, I just know that he basically wanted to divorce everything to do with the Old Testament, get that out.
Yeah, a lot of people do that too.
Well, yeah, Constantine shows up later and makes anything deemed "quote unquote" Jewish, punishable by death. So right. Here's Easter. Here you go. Passover, can't do that no more. Right. Eventually Sabbath is changed and all kinds of stuff. So, I'm just saying, when you think of the devil, what does he do? He always, right from the start, he's twisting what God says.
Right.
So I'm just putting it out there. Is it possible, whether intentionally or unintentionally, that this has happened in our English translations? And, it's caused me, even the stuff that we've talked about and just looking at what, the further back we go in looking at commentaries, the people closest to the source material, how they understood, for instance, Genesis 4:1.
Right.
How did they understand it? And we can talk about how we understand it now, thousands of years removed from the original text, but going back to Ezra and the people coming out of the Babylonian exile, and they're redoing, writing their Torah out in Aramaic and what have you. They clearly had a different understanding of Genesis 4:1.
Yes.
So anyway, that's I have this annoying habit of coming up with these ideas that get me in trouble.
Well, you're a deep thinker, and when people are seekers of truth, that's what happens, because a lot of times truth is completely alienated from what majority opinion is and what people think truth is in modern times. And that's because things have been altered, changed, hidden, forbidden, forgotten, and extirpated. And with regard to, you ask as far as translation, my preference is the Aramaic, the Targum, the first translation of the Hebrew Torah into a different language, and the one that the Jews, the Israelites, used themselves after the diaspora. When the temple was rebuilt and worship reinstituted, that's the one, the English translation of that one that we have available, and which people can look to and study from. We show, my son's latest book is on how the word of the Lord has been removed 200 plus times from just the first 5 books of the Pentateuch, and then 60 times from Psalms, and how that hides the relationship of Christ with not only the early patriarchs, but with Israel as a nation. And so, but I do believe that, even with the work of Ivan Panin and my friend Bill McGregor, who did the tuning fork, he shows that the 66 books of the current King James Version of the Bible are connected and divinely inspired in connection with the 66 books of Isaiah. And then Ivan Panin, he did the whole series of how the number 7 is encoded and found all throughout the books of the Bible, the Old and New Testament, and how that could only be divinely inspired. And so I know that, without a doubt, the King James is inspired, encoded with inspiration of the Most High God. But I also know how things have been taken out of it, as far as the names, the holy names of the Father, the Son, and then also the connections with the word of the Lord, and things like, even with the allusion to serpent seed in Genesis 4:1, according to the Targum, and Genesis 5, and all those things. And there's so much other stuff too that are found in. But like you, I'd take and study from all the sources, all the English translations, anything that I can, and the Hebrew and the Greek, and looking at the Strong's Concordance and the Blue Letter Bible and Bible Hut. I like to study all of it to get a fullness on the underlying truth of how everything is connected. But I do believe that people can really benefit and learn from the Aramaic if they go back and look at what is the a 2,000-year-old translation, 2,000 years older than the King James. And so
Kevin Stoll, I think you know him. He's a moderator. He first of all, Kevin, thank you. He sent me the book that I referenced a while back, the Gustav Davidson book, a dictionary of angels.
Yeah, I just got that myself.
Oh, you got a copy too?
Yeah.
Nice handy resource there. So thank you, Kevin. He also sent me, I don't know if he sent it to you or not, a PDF. I'm sharing it on the screen here now. It's a short document. It's only like 9 pages. but it's the Israelite Samaritan version of the Torah, first English translation compared with the Masoretic version. I haven't really gone through it too much. I just kind of skimmed it over about an hour ago or so. He says there are subtle differences as well as big parts missing. Just thought it was interesting. He's digging deeper with it himself. But have you heard anything about the Israelite Samaritan text?
No, I don't believe I have, unless it's a connection to a particular Bible. It starts with a K. I can't remember the people, the tribe, the name of these people, but they have an older version of the New Testament as well than the one that we have. And I have that one, and I've been studying it, and it could possibly be this same one that Kevin's talking about, but I'm not positive. I'm not sure. But yeah, I would definitely enjoy checking that out and seeing. And then, sometime I'll look up the book that I'm talking about, and I'll make mention, maybe share it in commentary or description. Definitely by next show. So since we brought it up, yeah.
All right, cool. So yeah, Kevin, if you haven't already done so, maybe you can shoot that over to Zen.
Yeah, please do.
As well. I think I got time to read this before. We got 4 minutes. I'll try to zip through it. Starting in chapter 76 in the Lawrence. The first wind is called the Eastern because it is the first. The second is called the South because the Most High there descends. And frequently there descends he who is blessed forever. The Western wind has the name of diminution because there all the luminaries of heaven are diminished and descend. The fourth wind, which is named the North, is divided into three parts, one of which is for the habitation of man, another for seas of water with valleys, woods, rivers, shady places, and snow, and the third part contains paradise. 7 high mountains I beheld, higher than all the mountains of the earth, from which frost proceeds while days, seasons, and years depart and pass away. 7 rivers I beheld upon earth, greater than all rivers, one of which takes its course from the west into a great sea. Its water flows. 2 come from the north to the sea, their waters flowing into the Erythraean Sea on the east. And with respect to the remaining 4, they take their course in the cavity of the north. 2 to their sea, the Erythraean Sea, and 2 are poured into a great sea, where also it is said there is a desert. 7 great islands I saw in the sea and on the earth, 7 in the great sea. Wow. We got 3 minutes. You think you can get through
sure.
Charles? Okay.
And the first quarter is called the east because it is the first, and the second the south because the Most High will descend there. Yea, there in quite a special sense will he who is blessed forever descend. And the west quarter is named the diminished because there all the luminaries of the heaven wane and go down. And the fourth quarter named the north is divided into 3 parts. The first of them is for the dwelling of men. The second contains seas of water, and the abysses and forests and rivers, and darkness and clouds, and the third part contains the garden of righteousness. I saw 7 high mountains, higher than all the mountains which are on the earth, and thence comes forth hoarfrost, and days, seasons, and years pass away. I saw 7 rivers on the earth, larger than all the rivers. One of them coming from the west pours its water into the great sea. And these 2 come from the north to the sea and pour their waters into the Erythraean Sea in the east. And the remaining 4 come forth on the side of the north to their own sea. 2 of them to the Erythraean Sea, and 2 into the great sea, and discharge themselves there. And some say, into the desert. 7 great islands I saw in the sea, and in the mainland. 2 in the mainland, and 5 in the great sea.
Yeah, I'm trying to envision this on the AE map.
Right.
What what's the Erythraean Sea? Are you familiar with that?
I'm not, but I think that they connect that like with the island of Paradise.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering if there's some kind
the
of
Erythraean Isles, and so I think it's connected to the north where the Hyperboreans and even Shambhala, Thule, all these places for the far north and where the demigods are said to live. The Mount Olympus, and which is, I believe, the Mount of the Congregation. Um, and so it could be the sea that is surrounding what is the four quadrants of what seem to be, the what is described in the, well, we'll pick it up, but
right.
in Mercator's map.
Every day, questions arise.
Are the stories in the Bible true?
What if I told you that there are hundreds of confirming witnesses,
which give intricate detail to the stories in the Bible?
Have you ever found yourself deep in the rabbit hole with questions that no one seemed to have the answers to? Join us every other Friday at 9 p.m. Eastern Time for our Ask Me Anything series with author and researcher Zen Garcia, as he sheds light on the mysteries which have us all searching together. Many truth seekers are constantly studying alone. But there is a place where we can come together. The Digital Readers Club is our online ecclesia meant for those who've forsaken churchianity, but still want the closeness of a family to study with. Join us every Saturday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time to put together the puzzle pieces of truth scattered throughout the ancient scriptures.
Your partnership with Sacred Word Publishing goes further than the publishing of ancient manuscripts and weekly video content.
You also make a huge impact across the earth in orphanages in Myanmar, India, Uganda, and Kenya.
Your support is crucial for the development of the ecclesia of real truth seekers.
We thank you for joining us in hosting Secrets Revealed, Momentary Zen, the Digital Readers Club, Ask Me Anything series, and other shows that have helped lead so many to the truth of salvation.
To become even more involved, please visit patreon.com/sacredwordpublishing, where you can partake in exclusive, interactive, patron-only content and help us continue shining the light of love in this darkened world.
Hello friends, thank you for joining us this evening. I'm your host, Zen Garcia.
On the Revolutionary Radio Project, I'm your host, Rob Skiba, and we are studying the Book of Enoch, and we just read, what chapters were we just reading? 76, I think?
And 77, yes.
76 and 77 in Charles. And right before the break, we were talking about the, how you say that, Erythraean Sea. Mm-hmm. So quickly looked it up during the break. The description was a former maritime designation that always included the Gulf of Aden, and at times other seas between Arabia, Felix, and the Horn of Africa. When I did a quick Google search on it, I'll put it up on the screen for those watching on YouTube, this is what I saw. So apparently, at least in ancient times, that was what we now call the Indian Sea area, going into the Horn of Africa and the Gulf of Aden. But to your point, I was looking at it too, sort of from a pre-flood AE map kind of perspective, because this whole description is rather interesting. I want to go back to verse 1 and 2, or verse 1 anyway. This is talking about 4 quarters of the world, 7 mountains, 7 rivers, the first quarter. So I'm wondering if this is the same as the 4 corners. A lot of times that word that's translated as corners can also mean quarter or region like that. So I'm wondering if it's called the east because it is the first, and the second, the south, because the Most High will descend there. So he's descending from the south. At least that's what it looks like. Yeah, Lawrence says the same thing. The second is called the south because the Most High there descends, and frequently there descends he who is blessed forever. What's your take on that?
Well, I take that as far as connecting it with Jerusalem, since that seems to be his holy land. But I also believe that, where it says that Christ would come back from the north, that the opening, in my opinion, is there in the north. But with regard to this whole particular chapter, I look at it as the same way that we were looking at the winds, and that you have to, even with all the descriptions of the luminaries and their movement, in my opinion, Enoch is showing to us from above, and like these 7 continents, I believe, would be, looking down at the entirety of the world. And so just like when you're looking at the movements of the sun back and forth between the tropics, you have to look at that map that has that is the azimuthal equidistant projection map, and how last week, when looking at the movements of the winds, and I have a screen share too, that we were looking at this particular map. And in the same way, I think that Enoch is describing, again, the 4 quadrants that would be the north, the west, the east, and the south. And so he's looking at the entirety of what is, and that possibly the seas, there would be the greater, which would be the outer ring, and then maybe the smaller, which is the inner. But again, we don't know exactly. But I do believe that Enoch, in all of his descriptions of all of his visions, that he's looking at the fullness of the world from above, and that the 4 quadrants, again, would be the circle of the earth inscribed upon a square. And so that's...
I'm sorry. What you're showing here, this is from your book, Flat Earth is Key to Decoding the Book of Enoch.
Right. And this is when we were talking about the winds last time.
Last week, yeah.
Yeah.
So you actually have this in your book then, here, about the Erythraean Sea. Well, it's interesting. two come from the north to the sea. Their water's flowing into the Erythraean Sea. So, yeah, I could still see that. Like, well, I wasn't looking at it that way, but from if you go back to that previous.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Flowing from the north. So if we're considering this direction again from the vantage point of Israel,
right.
Jerusalem going north, all this water flowing into the Erythraean Sea here, if that is, in biblical time is the same as in whatever ancient times when the Indian Sea was called that.
Mm-hmm.
The other thought I had was when I was doing the research for my Yahuwah Triangle series, it talks about the Gihon that encompasses the land of Ethiopia.
Mm-hmm.
And right now Gihon is a spring. It's underground. Solomon was baptized there and anointed king, and all kinds of stuff happened there. So my hypothesis was that if can you see my cursor moving on the screen here?
Let me go to where you are. I have to open up the YouTube.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I'm talking about. I got my cursor over. Whoops! You just change the screen again.
Oh, sorry. Hold on. Oh, you're doing it from what I was looking at.
Yeah, I was showing the.
Okay, sorry. Okay, no, I don't see your cursor, but.
Okay, well, neither do people on radio, so I should describe it anyway. Yeah. I gotta remember, hey, we're on radio here, even though I'm showing it. So my cursor's over what we call the Mediterranean Sea now. Yeah. So Joshua says that in the days of Enoch, when King James says it was in his days that men began to call upon the name of the Lord, and it sounds. Well, that sounds good, right? Well, no. The words used there actually mean profane.
Right.
And as we've read in various other texts, they're saying, no, that was when they started worshiping other gods and idols and all kinds of stuff. And the book of Joshua says that he flooded 1/3 of the earth with the Gihon.
Yes, I remember.
So when I was considering all of that, I basically put like if you can imagine taking the compass needle, putting it on the Giza Plateau, and extending the needle all the way out to Babylon, and just drawing a circle. That was my theory was with the center point being Giza. My theory was that was the region known as Eden, the land region known as Eden. Within eastward was placed the garden, and eastward from there,
would be over here.
Being Jerusalem.
Right, yeah.
Shechem being ground zero for the trees. So I was looking at the sort of the traditional idea of the four rivers. Now we know Tigris and Euphrates, those are easy to identify because they're still there.
Yeah.
What's the other one? Hiddekel is no longer a river that we can see. However, if you look at that region on Google Earth, you could draw right from the Persian Gulf area where the Tigris and Euphrates come in. You could go right across Saudi Arabia on Google Earth and see a dry riverbed.
Right.
You clearly see that there used to be something there going all the way across.
Right.
It's dried up now. And so the other river that's missing is Gihon. But it says that it encompasses the land of Ethiopia, Ethiopia is way the heck down, below the Horn of Africa, right? So my theory then was that at the time of the flood, the headwaters area of the Gihon got covered over with land, and so now, during the flood, so now it's an underwater spring that incidentally went underneath the temple, which is why I don't believe that the Temple Mount is the Temple Mount.
Right.
Because
I agree.
It was in the city of David, and the Gihon, it doesn't go under the so-called Temple Mount, but it does go under the city of David. Mm-hmm. So that was the waters that were used to. That's a lot of blood. When all the sacrifices and stuff, that's a big bloody mess. But they had like a underground aquifer, I guess, pressurized or something, and they would just do whatever they did to release it, and they would clean off, all that blood.
Right.
So that's underground now, but what we now call the Nile, you can see it doesn't quite go all the way down to Ethiopia, but you can see if you follow the topography, where if it was a stronger river, it could easily go all the way down into encompassing Ethiopia if you just continued the Nile River. Mm-hmm. So my thought was that what we now call the Nile River was the lower half, if you will, of the Gihon that is still above ground. The rest being submerged, and but when it was above ground, when he flooded 1/3 of the earth. Of course, earth, the word eretz is interchangeable.
Yes, land, yeah.
Land or world proper.
Right.
Like we're looking at the AE map here, that could also be earth. But within the circle if I put that needle in Giza and draw out to the outermost being Babylon, the circle that is there, the Mediterranean takes up about 1/3 as a pie chart, of that region. So I speculated and said, could it be that what we now call the Mediterranean Sea is that area that was judged in the pre-flood world?
Uh-huh.
And because they're finding all kinds of stuff under there, the various ideas of Atlantis. Some say it's in there, some say it's out, of the Straits of Gibraltar.
Yeah,
on the other side.
Culture.
Yeah, but I mean, there's a lot of stuff there.
Right.
That's buried, under that water. So I began to speculate, could that be? So just kind of thinking out loud with regard to this chapter that we just looked at, maybe that fits. I don't know that the AE map as it is today is the same as it was pre-flood.
Right.
It seems to me that this was connected. Assuming the shape of the continents that we have today are accurate, they fit together. I mean, even when you're looking at a globe or even the AE map, if you can just kind of move things around, there's a puzzle piece that fits.
Right.
And so when that chapter was talking about the Great Sea, I'm thinking that because it says he gathered the waters together and called them seas, and he gathered the land into one place and called it earth, called it land. Mm-hmm. That in kind of a simplistic term, if we consider Pangea,
yes,
right. And all of this may have slid also, but if it was more of a centralized landmass,
right,
with a great sea going all the way around it, and perhaps rivers and waterways and mini seas in between, that maybe we can make some sense of all this stuff,
right,
that we just read.
Right.
I don't know, just thinking out loud here.
Yeah, no, I'm with you, and there's a book that we put out called the Book of the Earth that this person did a study on all of the ancient belief systems of as far as what the world was in the ancient past, and he talks about, I think it's a she that wrote the book, Edna something Kenton or something of that nature, but she speaks about how all the native and the indigenous peoples around the world spoke about the island being Turtle Island, that there was once a supercontinent, and that it was Pangea, and that it was unbroken, and altogether one island, and it made like the shell of a turtle, and then it was in the center, and everything else, it was surrounded by water, and that it wasn't until sometime whenever, and I believe that this was when the judgment went out upon the fallen angels, perhaps in the time where, before the first world age and the second world age, where the earth became without form and void, and then at that time was completely destroyed and submerged and shattered, really, in my opinion, from below and above, and that perhaps at that time is when the continents initially separated and came to have the different contour and the different shape that we're more familiar with now, looking at the azimuth equidistant projection map from above and seeing the separations of the different land masses. And because it would make sense too that later God knowing the end from the beginning, and that he's going to separate the tribes and the tongues and the peoples and place them in different parts of the world, that that would keep and hold the divisions, as far as having the land masses and the continents in the shape that they currently are in.
Yeah, I was going to look that up. What is that, Genesis 2?
Genesis chapter 1, verse 2.
No, I mean the rivers are in chapter 2.
Yeah, chapter 2. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I misspoke. I think I said Hiddekel. Hiddekel, I think, was the original name for Tigris, maybe.
Okay.
I forget.
Yeah, I know. It's one of those.
It's been a long time since I looked into it. It's the Pison River.
Yeah, Pison. Mm-hmm.
Pishon, however you pronounce it.
Right.
That's the one I was referring to that goes across. It's the dry riverbed. Because it says it goes through. Well, let me just put it over on the screen here for everybody. It says, the name of the first is Pison. That is it which compasses the whole land of Havilah, where there is gold. Mm-hmm. And so I was looking into all of that and came to the conclusion that that's what we're seeing, the dry riverbed that's going across, and the gold of Havilah is really good. And then, of course, Gihon says is the same that compasses the whole land of Ethiopia. So, like, when everybody was, looking into Eden, like, they weren't paying attention, I don't think, to the description of these rivers, because, like, what was his name? I think it was Stan Deo, was saying that it was way down in Tanzania or someplace, like, way down here.
Yeah, I remember him
talking
dude, about that.
Yeah, he put out a bunch of stuff about the same time I did. We were like doing parallel studies, but came to vastly different conclusions. Mm-hmm. I was doing my research for the UO Triangle. This was back in 2014. I did a whole series of lectures on it in like November and December. Mm-hmm. And also did I did it for Sukkot that year, so earlier, September, October. So that he had been making the public speaking circuit, doing radio shows and stuff like that with Skywatch and whatnot. Mm-hmm. And I mean, his logic for what he was, I mean, it's interesting. I'll give him that. But I'm like, dude, like, the rivers, it's telling you,
Yeah, where they are.
Yeah. And, other people that were locating it, like in the Persian Gulf and other stuff, I'm like, well, it's like everybody that I was looking into the Garden of Eden, they weren't paying attention to the Gihon. Mm-hmm. So, anyway, that's a conclusion I came to. So you going to show something about on the Mercator?
Yeah, I was thinking that on the Mercator map, if these 4 rivers somehow connected to at one time, when all this, because if you look, it seems like all this could have came together too with what was the northern portion of, what I believe originally paradise was up towards the north. And then afterwards, when they moved east, then they ended up in Jerusalem. But that the demigods and the whole thing with the Mount Meru and all of that, that's located there again at the north, and that's where the opening for paradise and also the entrance into Sheol, the whirlpool that surrounds the mountain. And then if all of this was somehow connected together, if these rivers would connect with those 4 in some manner, I don't know, but
that's interesting.
Just speculating.
The lower quarter area has always been peculiar to me. Like, it doesn't seem to have a defined border like the other quarters do.
Right.
It's like it just sort of slides out of the sea.
Yeah.
Where the other ones are hedged with mountain ranges.
Right.
It is interesting. I mean, when you consider the ancient maps that, I mean, up until very recently, they all had this.
Right, exactly, yeah.
So, to kind of reiterate some of the things we've said in previous shows, that's a way more interesting and accessible to me than anything in the South would be.
And then, we talk about the whole theme of Tartaria and the mud floods, which actually I'm doing a show with Flat Earth British tomorrow night, and so I'm going to ask him some questions on, because he's done a lot of research on that, but the ancient maps, even the Great Lakes seem to be a newer phenomena, as well as California now being connected to the continental United States. And so, there's things we don't know.
Just within the last 200-300 years.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
That's crazy. I mean, when you think about it, because I was trying to think of when at the time period, it seems like it was somewhere between the 1600s and maybe late 1700s that I remember seeing a map or something that was California as an island.
Yeah. Yeah, and it was as recent as the late 1600s. That's the way that it is depicted. And then there, on some of those maps, there's a world empire called Tartaria, which none of us had heard about until people started examining these ancient maps. And then there's allusion to them in some of the more ancient books, like, for instance, the Travels of Noah into Europe, which describe the peopling of the earth after the flood of Noah's day, and how all the different countries of the world in Europe were first settled and came to be from the three sons of Noah. There's mention of Tartaria in that particular book, and even of it being an empire before the flood of Noah's day.
Wow.
And so, yeah, very ancient. And this leading up to and being on maps up to the late 1600s, that's pretty amazing when you think about it.
That's, massively significant. How did you ever make any connection between the Tartarians and the Thracians, or is there any connection to be made?
I think there's, the Thracians were the first empire that came up after the flood. Mm-hmm. And I think what happened is this Tartarian empire, that if it's, according to this particular book, if it actually existed before the flood of Noah's day, it would seem to be like the Atlantean empire, which was spread all across the earth, and which was built again in this megalithic cyclopean type architecture, and with the incorporation of pyramids and ziggurats and temple structures that all over the world, and that people inherited this architecture and just moved in on it. Like, for instance, how they date the Mayans and all of that some of that may have been even pre-existent. And then, the stelas where they have the dating and all, they could have put that up much later, just like, we see in different parts of the world, megalithic sites, which, some are at the bottoms of the oceans. And certainly we couldn't have created that, especially in that much of an ancient time. And so I think a lot of this cyclopean infrastructure, like the pyramids in Egypt, are very much older than we understand or are able to conceptualize. And that this ancient culture, just like even here, we see that, in America, we had all of these cities and all of these city centers that somehow were just inherited, and that people just moved in after whatever people had originally created them disappeared. And I don't know exactly what happened to them or what, but there is, even in the indigenous, the Native American people speak of a giant people that used to live here before they were here. And these kind of myths and legends are found in other places like Baalbek in Lebanon. Those places are said to have been made by the giants, as other places in South America. They attribute Pumapunku and some of the, Tenochtitlan and those kind of places as having been created by a race of giants that disappeared before the Native American people came to be. And so, I don't know if this is what was the Atlantean empire, and were they, the fallen angels certainly seem to have been larger size than us, but
Your partnership with Sacred Word Publishing goes further than the publishing of ancient manuscripts and weekly video content.
You also make a huge impact across the earth in orphanages in Myanmar, India, Uganda, and Kenya.
Your support is crucial for the development of the ecclesia of real truth seekers.
We thank you for joining us in hosting Secrets Revealed, Momentary Zen, the Digital Readers Club, Ask Me Anything series, and other shows that have helped lead so many to the truth of salvation.
To become even more involved, please visit patreon.com/sacredwordpublishing, where you can partake in exclusive, interactive, patron-only content and help us continue shining the light of love in this darkened world.
Many truth seekers are constantly studying alone. But there is a place where we can come together. The Digital Readers Club is our online ecclesia meant for those who've forsaken churchianity but still want the closeness of a family to study with. Join us every Saturday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time to put together the puzzle pieces of truth scattered throughout the ancient scriptures. Every day, questions arise.
Are the stories in the Bible true?
What if I told you that there are hundreds of confirming witnesses,
which give intricate detail to the stories in the Bible?
Have you ever found yourself deep in the rabbit hole with questions that no one seemed to have the answers to? Join us every other Friday at 9 p.m. Eastern Time for our Ask Me Anything series with author and researcher Zen Garcia, as he sheds light on the mysteries which have us all searching together.
Hello, friends. Thank you for joining us this evening. I'm your host, Zen Garcia.
And we're back. And we're back on the Revolutionary Radio Project. I'm your host, Rob Skiba, and it helps to have the microphone tuned up. I had it turned down there during the break. So yeah, we're already in the second hour. Right before the break, you were talking about ancient cultures, ancient civilizations, and things that may have just simply been forgotten in recent memory, or intentionally taken out of the textbooks and things like that. Speaking of taken out, before I forget, the video I was referring to earlier in the broadcast about how could the Bible have been tampered with. I have the video up on the screen now for people if they want to check it out. It's by a guy named Bart D. Ehrman, Ehrman. The title of the video is Misquoting Jesus in the Bible, Professor Bart D. Ehrman. Interesting video. Now, in regard to what we were talking about right before the break, let me put up a picture here that I use a lot in my presentations. The pre-flood timeline of the Nephilim chart. You're talking about various ancient cultures and Mayans and stuff like that, and a fair amount of these things, if not maybe all of them, pre-existed the flood.
Right.
Like a few years ago, back in the big 2012, right? December 21st, 2012, we was talking about the Mayan calendar, Aztec calendar stone, all that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that dates back to 3000 BC, 3114 BC. So if my calculations are correct, I believe what I call the Genesis 6 experiment happened in the 9th Jubilee in the days of Jared in about 3550 BC. Then we have the first generation Nephilim called the Titans. They rule for 500 years, and within those 500 years, the Book of Enoch says they were to kill each other off. That became known as stylized. It became known to the Greeks as the Clash of the Titans. We see that Enoch is born and he lives 365 years. He's born during the Clash of the Titans. And then when you get around the 3114-ish time frame, that's where things start kind of piling up and getting interesting. You have the Aztec calendar stone, Mayan calendar, all that shows up at 3114 BC. We have the death of Adam about 20 years later or so. And then again, about 20 years after that is the end of the 500 years of the Titans. That's when the first generation of Nephilim are killed off. And then sometime shortly after that, the parents, the Watchers, were judged, bound, and buried for 70 generations. And then Enoch is raptured somewhere close to the 3000 mark, 3000 BC. And then Noah's born I think 78 years later or something like that. And then we have, flash forward 600 years from Noah's birth, or 500 years anyway, to the last 100, 120 years leading up to the flood, and we have the creation of animal human hybrids and all that kind of stuff. So, this chart alone shows you there was some crazy stuff happening in the pre-flood world. And, people talk about, or Yeshua said in Matthew 24:37, as it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be in the coming of the Son of Man. Well, the days of Noah were pretty jam-packed with all kinds of weird, wild stuff. How much are we going to see from the days of Jared? Probably not much. I don't think. Although I think we're beginning to catch up, maybe, in terms of technology. We have I believe, a different type of technology. I think the technology that they used back then was a lot more Earth-friendly. Dealing with Earth crystals and understanding pyramids and how rocks work, and they were doing stuff with rock, crystal, wood, and things of that nature. We're doing stuff now with metals and toxic plastics and all that kind of stuff. So and we still can't hold a candle to what they were doing back then. Right. So just wanted to kind of throw that in there to maybe support a little bit of what you were saying before the break. And if you had anything more you wanted to add to what you were saying.
Yeah, I do. And actually, the book that I'm working on now, the Pre-adamites in the Antediluvian World, I take it back even further. I believe that there was an age that existed before what is the Genesis 1:2, where the earth became without form and void. And I just did a show on this 2 weeks ago called The World That Then Was, where I broke down Second Peter and First Ecclesiastes, where it talks about nothing new under the sun, and it speaks about the old time, and that particular word is olam, and you look at it and it speaks about a very ancient, distant past. And then looking at Second Peter, and then also Ezekiel chapter 26 and Jeremiah chapter 4 verses 23 through 30, I believe that it's speaking about and connecting to this particular passage, because the words tohu wabohu are found in Jeremiah 4:23 as well, and that those particular words in the Hebrew, they speak about something happening, in my opinion, that there was the earth became a deserted wasteland and an indistinguishable ruin. And ruin also implies that something occurred. And when you look at Second Esdras chapter 6, as well as Isaiah chapter 45, he speaks about, in Second Esdras, it speaks about how God created the heavens and the earth, and he made it a perfect work. And then in Isaiah 45:18, he speaks about how he created the earth not in vain and to be inhabited. And you look at the different versions, and it's either not in vain or not deserted or not empty. But it's implying that it was created perfect and, without, and to be inhabited. And so, in my opinion, and with what I'm writing about in this particular book, I talk about how in Second Enoch, it speaks about the fallen angels as being cast out on the second day. In chapter 29 and 30, you see there that it's the word of the Lord speaking to Enoch, which is Christ, and he talks about how he cast out one from out of the order of the angels, had an impossible thought to establish his throne above mine, and to overthrow me, or something of that nature. And then we see that, in my opinion, that connects with Luke chapter 10 verse 18, whereas Christ tells us that he saw Satan as lightning cast out or fallen from the heavens, because I believe he was the one that cast him out. And so in my opinion, the fallen angels were cast out long ago, and this was a result of the war in heaven, and that when the earth was recreated, reestablished, and reformed from Genesis 1:3 and onwards, that they were already in placement here upon the earth before even the Pre-adamites that were created on the sixth day. And so that some of this architecture, because again, we see that there are megalithic structures in cities like Yanaguni and Dwarka, and there's this pyramid city outside of Cuba on the bottom of the ocean floor, right, that had to have been built at a time when the ocean levels were completely different. And, I don't trust science at all, but they say that the ice age, or the global ice age, or whatever, that its meltdown was 13,000 years ago. And some of the people speculate that the Emerald Tablets of Thoth, are speaking of a time dating back 25,000 years. The Sumerian texts on the reign of the demigods and the timeline of the King's List, well, when you add that all together, it goes back to 432,000 years in the distant past. And so is that, possibility, or is the King List actually true? There are confirming witnesses to that. Even Berosus and Mantheo speak about and write about the antediluvian times and the kings and the fallen ones that lived during that time. But it's my opinion that the Titans, that there were, we see the mud fossils and how some of the landscape and the mountains and things of that nature look like these really huge giants, like giants that, in the Bible, it even says that Og and some of the pre-flood giants were of, huge size, could even lift up and rip mountains off of the ground. Now, if that's in any way true, then maybe there's some possibility that, giants of a larger size, and maybe it's even the fallen angels, because in the book, The Legends of the Patriarchs and the Prophets, it speaks about that when the angels were cast out and they were of larger stature than humans now, that they took on corporeal or took on physicality from being cast down, that after 7 days they started to become substance. And if that's, there's any truth to it, then they would have took on some kind of a physical nature. And again, in the Sumerian text, it says that, they, being here in the earth, that they started to age, and then they started to move towards death when they never had previously. And so just, looking at all the ancient records and all the myths of Atlantis, the Emerald Tablets speak about a time when, the Atlantean culture ruled. And even in Plato, in the discourses of Solon, he mentions in the Critias and Timaeus this culture that was worldwide. And during James Churchward, he speaks about the culture of Mu and how it had existed all over the world, and that the Indian culture that he became privy to their ancient documents, which were these ancient clay tablets, that when he was shown and read and learned to read the record of this, they spoke about a time when their culture had been destroyed by, the Most High, and that they came from out of that destruction. And that same thing is also present in ancient Egypt. The Emerald Tablets speak about that when this diaspora happened, that the drowning of the temple of Undal, that the fallen angels split and went to 5 different places. And they created what were the ancient cultures of India, Japan, in the South America, and different places, even like, what we see in Baalbek and Stonehenge in the Middle East and different places like that, that it was the destruction, which I believe that is, again, linked to Genesis 1-2, the war in heaven, the separation of light and darkness, how Satan and Legion, 1/3 of the angels of the Most High, were cast out on the second day, that they were creating and establishing what were these cities in the megalithic sides that represented what they lived in the heavens. And that, I believe New Jerusalem is in pyramid shape, and that they were replicating that in all of the different cultures and all of the different creations that they were making here, and that God judged them for doing this dark magic where they were conjuring up devils and demons and inviting these dark entities, which we see that in the Kolbrin Bible, the Scroll of Thothis, as well as the Emerald Tablets. It speaks about that. And it also speaks about them as being these serpent-headed deities, and that they, like we see in other cultures, even the Egyptian, we have these hybrid, half human and half, reptilian, crocodilian, and even the Anunnaki, they're depicted as feathered serpents. And we see that in the depictions, they are of very much larger stature. Even sitting down, they dwarf those humans, which I believe that those are the pre-adamites that, where they tried to enslave and create a slave race and to make humanity into servants unto them. It's just, this is described in great detail in the Sumerian mythos as well. And so I do believe there was an age before the actual Genesis 1-2, without that, where the earth became without form and void, and that God judged them, destroyed what was the ancient Atlantean, the Mu culture, and then that is what led us into the Second World Age. And then we have a time where the pre-Adamites existed on the earth before Adam and Eve fell and came to be banished, and what is the last 6,000 years of our history. And so that's what I'm writing about in the book that I'm working on right now.
So, I've said it before. I don't, we read in Revelation that we're getting a reset.
Yeah, right.
That this place is going to get burned up, new heaven, new earth, and all that. We're going to get a reset. So my contention has always been, if we know we're going to get a reset, I have no problem believing that we could be in a reset.
Exactly, yeah.
Because, I think as humans, because we're finite, we have a beginning. We think of eternity as just going future.
Right.
But like eternity goes past.
Backwards, yeah, exactly.
Just as far as it goes future. So, I've never had a problem believing that, we could be in a reset, that there could have been all kinds of stuff before Genesis, 1, 2. I have no problem believing that at all. I've never spent a lot of time looking into it, though. It's just never been anything that I've spent any real amount of effort in. But it seems to me that one of the more recent guys to make that whole idea popular was G.H. Pember.
Yes, I mentioned his book as well in that show that I did. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. In fact, I think, was it next week? I think there's a True Legends conference coming up. The Steve Quayle crowd. I think it's next weekend, and I believe it's a virtual conference, if I'm not mistaken. You'd have to look it up. It's True Legends, and I thought I saw, because I saw a preview on Facebook that in the sort of the teaser for the conference, they're saying pre-Adamite civilization or something. So I just caught it out of the corner of my eye. What? And I seem to, don't quote me on this, but I seem to recall that Steve Quayle was of that mindset that there was, a pre-Adamite civilization. And if that's true, then, it does, without spending a lot of time looking into it, my thought on the Sumerian kings list and things like that was just either scribal error or gross elaboration. But, listening to what you just said, now I'm going, well, maybe... if these texts and, if we go with sort of Heiser's idea of the Divine Council, that at the Tower of Babel, various regions, people groups, 70 people groups, the Hebrews being lorded over literally by the Lord, Yahuwah, saying, okay, Satan, you want to come after me? Great. You take 69, I'll take 1, give it your best shot,
Right.
And sort of the fallen entities took charge over the various other people groups.
Yes.
And if that's the case, then I could see them, just kind of playing a scenario out in my mind, being the principality and power, let's say, over the Sumerian people,
right?
Giving those people that king's list of, pre-Genesis 1, 2.
Yes.
Okay, this is the way things work.
Right.
Back in the day, because that was their gods.
Yes,
telling their story. And being the Sumerians being, probably universally recognized as the oldest written text that we have, going back, as far back in recorded history as we can find, those Epic of Gilgamesh and cuneiforms and stuff like that. So I can see that now. I can look at that and go, okay, that's interesting, and bringing it more up to modern times. To I hate to bring things up and say don't look into it because I know immediately everybody's going to do it. Hey, don't eat from that tree. What do? They eat from the tree.
Right.
But I want to bring it up, but I'm going to bring it up with severe caution and say, if you're going to disregard what I'm about to say and go look into it anyway, do so with lots of prayer and fasting and be very sober-minded about it. Because it's, in my mind, it's probably one of the most dangerous books in print right now. And that's the Urantia book. Have you read that or looked into it at all?
I haven't read a lot of it. I've read some of it, but again, with it being globe-minded, and then also there's no mention of the dual bloodlines, and so if it doesn't unfold and unlock that mystery for me,
It's not worth the time. It's
exactly.
It's a 2,000+ page document. I mean,
right.
It's a unabridged dictionary.
Right.
But it's a book that claims authorship to be from angels.
Mm-hmm.
The angels delivered this in Chicago. Chicago is another interesting place, man. The more I look into Chicago, the more I'm like, man, that place has got some serious, interesting roots. Let's put it that way. But this book supposedly showed up in Chicago. I think it was like 1952 or 54, somewhere in the 50s. Claims authorship to be from angels, and it basically says, it's going to elaborate on what the Bible says. So where the Bible's silent or just gives you little bits and pieces, its goal is to unpack that. And of course, it's done very much from a Copernican model, which right off the bat, like now we look at it and go, yeah, whatever.
Right. Exactly.
Urantia being the angelic name for Earth, part of the Orvantin star cluster or some kind of nonsense. Anyway, it goes on and on. But same kind of idea with ancients. Now, with what you were saying, though, it seems to me that we got two things going on, and this may extend the timeline a bit in my mind anyway, is, okay, the pre-adamite has two meanings now in my mind. It has the meaning of that world that existed before Genesis 1-2.
Right.
And then it has the meaning of male and female created he them in Genesis 1 before we get to Adam, Eve later being taken out of Adam.
Exactly.
So, and it's only been, again, this is like within the last few years, 2-3 years, that I've even entertained that idea. But, going back and looking, when we covered Genesis chapter 1, like, wait a minute. It says, male and female created he them.
Yes.
In the Genesis 1 account. And Genesis 2. So Genesis 1 gives us, and I believe there are 6 literal days. So I don't believe we can assign ages to those days. I believe they're what we consider 24-hour days, not extended periods of time. Right, but that's all wrapped up in Genesis 1. And then you get Genesis 2 and the creation of Adam from the dirt and Eve pulled from the rib of Adam.
Right.
So is there then, I'm just thinking out loud and just, ask me anything right here, asking you, is there then in your mind an extended period of time between Genesis chapter 1 and Genesis chapter 2?
I do believe it represents at least some period of time. And then again, if you're looking at the Sumerian texts, which, again, they're heliocentric and they were written to be deceptive and to give us the idea that the Anunnaki are from some distant galaxy, some distant star system, that they created us, all that. And so, given that they are based largely on deception, it does speak about how they were trying to create and enslave the pre-adamites. And there, was an extended period of time from their arriving here to what we see because they also mention 2 creations as well. They call the first creation, the pre-adamites, the Lulu, the primitive worker. And then all of a sudden, the modern man created by Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh it shows up on the scene. They call this being civilized man. And so there are 2 different beings, 2 different creatures also mentioned in the Sumerian text. But again, I state that, there's a long duration of time that passes where they're genetically experimenting and manipulating and trying to enslave the pre-adamites. And we see that during this time, the worship of the feathered serpent was worldwide. And we see that all of the cultures that came up as a result of the destruction of Atlantis, the diaspora of the Atlanteans to the different regions of the world, they all have in their oral traditions and in their legends and in their records that their emperors are descended of the dragons. And so that's how ancient, it goes back to that time. And so, but then the last 6,000 years of history, we have the modern creation of Adam and Eve, and the appearance of the civilized man, or what is the modern human upon um, upon the earth. And so that's where it gets confusing. You have to be able to discern from what is the history of Atlantis before the Pre-adamites, and then the Pre-adamites who are said to have been enslaved and brought up, as a slave people to these fallen angels, and they're worshiping a pantheon of gods and goddesses. And also they worship the feathered serpent, and they declare that they were seated by the angels from above. That even Credo Mutwa, he talks about the Chitta Uli or the Chitta Uri, who are these dragon-like entities that descended down and declared them, that they should be worshipped as gods. So much.
Every day, questions arise.
Are the stories in the Bible true?
What if I told you that there are hundreds of confirming witnesses,
which give intricate detail to the stories in the Bible?
Have you ever found yourself deep in the rabbit hole with questions that no one seemed to have the answers to? Join us every other Friday at 9 p.m. Eastern Time for our Ask Me Anything series with author and researcher Zen Garcia, as he sheds light on the mysteries which have us all searching together. Many truth seekers are constantly studying alone. But there is a place where we can come together. The Digital Readers Club is our online ecclesia meant for those who've forsaken churchianity, but still want the closeness of a family to study with. Join us every Saturday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time to put together the puzzle pieces of truth scattered throughout the ancient scriptures.
Your partnership with Sacred Word Publishing goes further than the publishing of ancient manuscripts and weekly video content.
You also make a huge impact across the earth in orphanages in Myanmar, India, Uganda, and Kenya.
Your support is crucial for the development of the ecclesia of real truth seekers.
We thank you for joining us in hosting Secrets Revealed, Momentary Zen, the Digital Readers Club, Ask Me Anything series, and other shows that have helped lead so many to the truth of salvation.
To become even more involved, please visit patreon.com/sacredwordpublishing, where you can partake in exclusive, interactive, patron-only content and help us continue shining the light of love in this darkened world.
Hello friends, thank you for joining us this evening. I'm your host, Zen Garcia.
And we're back on the Revolutionary Radio Project. I'm your host, Rob Skiba, and wow, this show is flying by. We only got one really short chapter done here going on. It's fascinating stuff, though. Somebody in the chat room wrote, I think the Sumerians, Anunnaki, Nibiru thing is a fabrication of the devil, planted in the past for us to find it, to lead astray in UFO and the whole space BS. And I agree with that. Yeah. I think we're both in agreement on that.
Right.
The devil's in it for the long haul.
Yes.
And so it makes sense to me that he would plant seeds way back, way back, because he knows sort of the timeline. He doesn't know all of the timeline, but he has a good idea of what the timeline is. And so he put things in place long time ago as a setup for a payoff today.
Yes.
In our day. But you were kind of on a roll there before the break, so I want to let you pick up where you left off and before we continue.
Well, I'm in agreement with regard to the Sumerian records. And, looking at the ancient accounts that are written by and that were passed on by the serpent, the Anunnaki, the dragons, whatever, yes, you have to be very careful and you have to discern, because just like the channeled material today, it's the same source, And so, but I do believe that there are some underlying truths to what they do say, and that you can, especially if you find connections all over to even with what is revealed in the scriptures. And I always take and use what is the scriptures as my foundational truth. But again, looking at the context of the Hebrew and what is mentioned there in Genesis 1:2 and 2 Peter, and again, I invite people to check out the show that I did 2 weeks ago, The World That Then Was. I explained this in great detail, my logic and why it is that I believe this and why it is that, I'm compiling all of this information from all these ancient sources. And I'm not in any manner saying that these ancient sources are, especially when it comes to like the Sumerian or like the Scroll of Thothis from the Colburn Bible that also speaks about the destruction of Atlantis, or the Emerald Tablets. I'm not saying they're inspired at all. I'm just sharing what they say, and this is the story that comes forth. And so, to bring it forth for consideration. But yes, I do believe without a doubt, especially now that we know the truth of biblical cosmology, that the heliocentric Copernican Darwinian worldview was planted in order to set up what I believe is the strong delusion now, and that is that the extraterrestrials, the ancient aliens, created us, of which so many people are buying into this mindset.
Yeah.
And so, we are warning against that. And most of the others, a lot of PhD scholars, a lot of people that write extensively, deeply researched books, they are buying into that. And I remember the guy, I can't remember his name now, from South Africa, Michael
Tellinger.
Yeah, Tellinger. He used to believe all this, but now he knows about flat Earth and biblical cosmology, and so he's having to reconsider all of that, because again, the Sumerian tale is that Nibiru was captured by the net force of what were the outer planets of our solar system, and that it then was brought into interaction. One of its moons smashed the planet that was there where the asteroid belt out is. Yeah, and that's their creation story. It's called the Enuma Elish. And so we know all that to be false. And then the stories of them setting up way stations, bases on the moon and Mars, that's all fabrication as well. And transporting gold to Nibiru. I mean, they have been locked here since the destruction of the the first world age, and I believe that the firmament being put into place was to imprison them, because it occurs on the second day at the same time that they were said to be cast out of the heavens and banished here to the earth. And then we see the firmament, which is an indestructible, impenetrable separation and barrier between the upper heavens and what are the lower heavens. The upper heavens being where the heavenly temple, the New Jerusalem, and the seat of the Most High, the throne of the Most High God, is located, and they are banished to the realms below the firmament. And so they have been locked here before even we appeared on the scene. And they're not coming from out there. They have been locked here. They've been located in the interior of the earth, and where, in Isaiah 14 it says that Lucifer, wanting to exalt his seat above the stars and the clouds of God, but yet he was cast down and thrown down to the sides of the pit. And so we know his domain is in the interior of the earth, and this is why historically and traditionally that hell has been associated as being under our feet and in the interior of the earth, because that's where the domain of the devil is. And they come out of what is the opening of the abyss at the north when they flood upon the earth, and that's also where the entrance into the upper heavens is. That's the ladder of Jacob, in my opinion. And so Jeremiah even talks about how the devils and the demons come from the north. In the Cave of Treasures, it speaks about, and the chapter 13 of Isaiah, how the giants will come from the north. And, at the end of the day, is the locust army being released from the bottomless pit. All these things are, in my opinion, connected again to the Mercator map and the whole connection of Hyperborea being in the north, the Mount of the Congregation, as well as Mount Olympus, the demigods living there, even in the Vedic cosmology, Mount Samuru, that the demigods live upon the top of the, this particular mountain. And then there's this whirlpool, this abysmal chasm that leads down into the interior of the earth, into the domain of the devil, called Hades, Sheol, whatever. But it's all connecting the same kind of topography, all that, I reveal in Paradise, Sides of the North, and the Mount of the Congregation. And so, yeah, I think there's truth to it. But I do agree with the listener that, the whole thing of the strong delusion is based upon that the Sumerians came from a different star system, that they even left and are coming to save us, and to bring in the golden age. All that is part of that deception, in my opinion.
Yeah, I'm in 100% agreement with that. When you're talking about the day 2 of the creation of the firmament and them falling the same day, because it seems to me that if we think of the creation days as literal days, 24-hour days, then the rebellion had to have happened in whatever pre-existed day 1.
Right.
And on the second day, what came to mind was, when you're talking about that, was the first Superman movie where General Zod and his guys were thrown into the Phantom Zone.
Right. Yeah, totally. I didn't even think about that.
Yeah,
the destruction of Superman's world, and
Krypton and the evil ones were thrown into the Phantom Zone.
Right.
I'm going, well, wait a minute. What if the firmament is the Phantom Zone?
Right.
And we're in it. We're stuck in the Phantom Zone. Forget the Twilight Zone. We're in the Phantom Zone.
Right.
And then I was thinking about the whole, because even when I was in the Copernican model mindset and was, I'd watched the Ancient Alien stuff, and I certainly disagree with their conclusions, but the evidence that they're finding is still very compelling.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And this whole idea that there was these beings that were harvesting gold and having humans, dig it up and do all this stuff. I'm like, why gold, Then I thought, wait a minute. I mean, New Jerusalem is like gold.
Mm-hmm, right.
So what if they are trying to create a counterfeit New Jerusalem
Right.
that they can show up in?
Right.
Just random thoughts that pop into my head. But then I'm thinking, yeah, but where would they build the thing? But then you think, well, if they are underground,
exactly, yeah.
And like, so let me ask you then. We might as well just forget any idea of going to the next chapter because these are two interesting conversations. I think we only have 15 minutes left. But so we're in agreement that the Abraham's bosom existed as a place where the saints went, I believe, prior to the crucifixion or resurrection.
Yes, right.
Are you of the opinion that that is empty now, or do you think people still go there?
No, I think the wicked go there.
Well, they don't go to paradise. They go to where the rich man was.
Right, but I think paradise is now where Adam and the descendants, when Christ took them out of Abraham's bosom, he took them to paradise, which is above.
Took them up. Well, like the ancient idea of Abraham's bosom was essentially there was paradise, aka Abraham's bosom, the good place. Then there was a great chasm, and then there was the place of torment where the rich man was in the story of rich man and Lazarus. And then below that is Tartarus, the prison of the gods.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the kings and the fallen angels.
The fallen angels and all, the archons and all that. So do you think, though, that if we go to some of the ideas of Agartha and the idea of an inner earth, hollow earth and all that, are they referring to the now void place that was Abraham's bosom, or is there another place over and above all of the places that we were just talking about? In other words, the places of Abraham's bosom, the place of torment and Tartarus, that's all place of the dead and or judgment.
Right.
Do you think that there is a habitable large space other than the deep underground military bases and things that we know about that would be like the Hollow Earth crowd wants to believe that the Admiral Byrd got to check out, or was he checking out the now vacated Abraham's bosom? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think that the Abraham's bosom that is vacated is part of the whole Shambhala, Asgard, and the interior. What the Vedics, they talk about the Naga races, the serpent races, and even these Bigfoot type people that seem to be living in the interior of the earth.
So they're going to the vacated Abraham's bosom, though, in your opinion?
Yes, and I believe now that Christ has taken Adam and the righteous out of what is the Abraham's bosom and the interior of the earth, that is no longer for the righteous, that when the righteous die, they go to New Jerusalem, and so now only the wicked go down into what is the interior. And I do believe they have now access to Abraham's bosom, what was Abraham's bosom, and that whole place under the earth is a holding place for the wicked, and that Shambhala, Asgard, these different places that the fallen ones are, I believe, living like kings, and that they have unbelievable worlds and cities and things made which are trying to replicate what they see in the heavens, or what they had seen in the heavens before their banishment and their being cast down. And that's why we see, even again, all the structures worldwide, the Cyclopean, megalithic temple complexes, because I do believe New Jerusalem is a pyramid as well, and that they are trying to replicate what they were once witness to, being before they were exiled. And so,
I think when I think of Abraham's bosom in that region now, that there may be people inhabiting now the vacated space there, I think of the movie Wrath of Khan, Star Trek II, when they shot the Genesis device into a dead moon, and Khan's like, I shall leave you as you left me, as you left her, buried alive, in the center of a dead planet, and then, they think they're doomed in the corridors of this place, and they're like, she's like, let me show you, Kirk's ex-wife's like, let me show you something. He's like, she wanted to show him Genesis. He's like, oh wait, McCoy's like, I thought this was Genesis. She's like, this? Huh. It took the Starfleet Corps of Engineers 10 months in spacesuits to core out this. No, what we did in there, we did in a day. And they walk into this area, and it's this beautiful paradise, complete with its own like mini sun inside the place.
Wow.
Just fantastic waterfalls and just amazing, like, wow, place. And that's what kind of popped into my head, is like, wow, could that be? Because I mean, there are so many ancient cultures that did talk about this place that people are going to.
Yeah, think of even Journey to the Center of the Earth, with Jules Verne. And we know he was an illuminist, and he wrote about things that happened even in the future. Some of his stuff was kind of prophetic. And so, yeah, who knows? Did he know something that we didn't know? I mean, certainly the stories of like the Smoky God, the fisherman, and his tale of, the giants that live in the interior of the earth, and the incredible technology and the megalithic, creatures and trees and things that are down within the interior of the earth. And then we think about a time during the First World Age, again, with the giant trees that could have been part of that age, and that maybe perhaps some of the mountain structures that we see are the stumps of trees that lived in that ancient time. I mean, this is all speculation, but something to consider with regard to the whole age before that of our modern age. Because again, there's weirdness to all of the work that Roger at Mud Fossils University that he does, and all the people that send in all these pictures of all the landscape and these mountains that take on the form and the shape of what seem to look like giant titans. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's undeniable. And creatures like elephants and horses and and turtles and all kind of weird stuff, trolls. I mean, just really weird creatures. And even there's descriptions of a time when even the dragonfly had a wingspan of 6 foot long.
Yeah.
Huge. Everything was of very much larger stature at a point in our distant past. And these kind of things, even, the mastodon dwarfed what are elephants of this day. And so there's things that we don't know and that we have not really considered, but I do believe are coming to light. And that's interesting that you mentioned Steve Quayle and the Pre-Adamites. I'm going to have to check that out and see what they're talking about.
Yeah, I can see if I can look that up. True Legends Conference. I'm pretty sure it's it's May 15th.
Okay.
So I got it on the screen here. You go to Gen6, GENSIX.com/conferences/True Legends Conference 2020. Ancient Cataclysms and Coming Catastrophes. Right on the first paragraph. Before Adam and Eve, before the Garden of Eden, before the earth had become formless and void, did a vast and ancient civilization thrive in the time before time began. Many refer to the period of antiquity as simply the gap theory, mysterious eons taking place between Genesis chapter 1, verses 1 and 2.
Yeah, I definitely want to see what they say and talk about, because, that's totally my mindset as well, especially for this book and what I'm writing currently.
Yeah, so I'm probably gonna get tickets for it too. It's a virtual conference, May 15th through May 16th.
Interesting.
Is the dates on that?
I know they're globe-centric, so I have to kind of ignore all that, but still, yeah, the pre-adamite stuff should be interesting.
And that's what really frustrates me with them, especially some of the guys in that crowd, because like they're all about Antarctica, like, you know, and inner Earth and hollow Earth and all that. Like they're like, I'm like, you guys are like 3 inches from the finish line. Like,
right.
Step over. Like, you know, you're so close. But man, I mean, you know, anything like this, you got to count the cost, and I think for some of these guys,
it's not worth it.
Way too much of a cost that they're gonna have to. Well, I mean, even if you look at their the logo on their page, it's got a massive mountain fireball, you know, headed towards the Earth.
Oh, really? Yeah.
You know, because, you know, apparently Tom Horn's all about wormwood, a big, you know, falling out of the sky thing. So, yeah, all that stuff is. Anytime I hear anything like that, my eyes just kind of roll. I'm like, nah, that ain't happening. That's what, like these people. Like, I love these people. First of all, they hate me. They don't.
Right. Yeah. I love their work too. You know, I mean, they were instrumental in a lot of my awakening, especially Steve Quell. I thought, you know, as far as the giants and Nephilim,
he's the guy.
Kind of fueled that stuff for me. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you got like Pember kind of really kicked it off in the modern era. Then his mantle, if you will, was picked up by Dr. I.D.E. Thomas, and then, you know, from there, you know, I think a good case could be made is in terms of the Nephilim. You know, the big guys out there easily be Steve Quell, L.A. Marzulli, you know, Tom Horn, those guys. You know, definitely carrying the torch on that. But man, I mean, like, they're so close. It's just that they can't, and they love the Book of Enoch. It's like, guys, what did you stop at chapter 15 or?
yeah, exactly.
I mean, you know, it's a little weird after that, but and by the time you get to the chapters we're in now, I mean, it's complete gobbledygook. It's total gibberish.
Right. Yeah.
When you're in a Copernican mindset, so it's like, come on, guys. I mean, if you give Enoch the credibility that you do, then listen to him for the rest of it.
Absolutely. And I know they're great researchers, so it's not that they cannot discover the truth. There just has to be an unwillingness to go there. Yeah, and I'm sure their listeners have contacted them and said, please look at this, you know, check this out, watch this video or read this book or something. So, you know, it's undeniable, but they never got past the point of cognitive dissonance, and that's something that we had to, you know. For me, it was either affirm myself a hypocrite or take that step and take a look at it and examine it with open mind and open heart, and lo and behold, no curvature.
Right. Well, I mean, that was the thing. You know, Doug Hamp and I started Quest for Truth together. Yeah. And I'm like, dude, how can you say you're on a quest for truth when you're refusing to get on the ship that's going on the cruise?
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Like, he didn't want to have anything to do with it. He didn't want to even entertain it at all.
Right.
You know, when I was first looking into it. And,
I remember.
It's frustrating. They got a good lineup, though, at this conference here. You know, a lot of times they have the Watchman conference. Hear the Watchman, I think it's called. They have that here in Dallas, but I don't even go to it because I'm not welcome.
Yeah, they look at you and kind of roll their eyes or whatever, or start whispering about you.
Yeah, as you're walking by.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, Steve Quill banned me from attending a conference that somebody else had paid my ticket and everything.
Oh, wow.
Like, he bought tickets for both Sheila and I, and he was getting our airfare, and he was about to book our hotel when Steve found out that, you know, what was happening. He's like,
oh, my gosh.
That dude's not welcome
so
here.
petty.
So, yeah, well.
It is what it is, right?
Yeah, they got a good lineup, though. I mean, it's Steve Quayle, Mike Adams, Russ Dizdar, Gary Wayne. I think Gary's probably a pre-Adamite guy.
Yeah, he is. I've talked a great deal with Gary.
Celeste Solom, not really familiar with her work. Carl Tykrib, I'm not sure how to pronounce his name. Michael Lake. I really enjoy Michael Lake's stuff. He's got some really good stuff. LA is going to be there. L.A. Marzulli, Robert Griswold, and Derek Gilbert. So, I mean, they got a good lineup. I guess I know what I'm going to do next weekend.
Yeah, I'm going to at least check out that Pre-adamite for sure.
Well, we got about a minute left, so no sense in trying to do anything else, really.
Right. I think it was an interesting show, and again, Enoch is describing, I believe, some of what we're talking about, and yeah, we'll pick it up, and there's still a lot of information to go through with regard to the book on the courses of the heavenly luminaries. Then we go into the dream vision, which will be really amazing, because it covers all the history and all the patriarchs and the lives, and it's prophetic as well. So
yeah, how many chapters are there total? I didn't even look in Enoch.
It's like 100 and something.
It's a lot of
I'm not sure.
A lot of them are short, so we're
we'll move through it pretty quickly.
All right, man. Well, enjoyed it, and we'll see you next week on your show. Was it 9 p.m.?
Yeah, 9
Eastern.
to 11. Yeah, Eastern Thursday.
Yeah, 8 p.m. Central.
Yep.
Good night, everybody.
Good night, all. Shalom.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us for this video and this broadcast. We appreciate all of you, and thank you for your patronage. Please do like and subscribe and share with your friends. God bless all of you in your seeking.